Hey, how's it going? Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, do that thing down below. I want to talk about the single most important upgrade you can possibly make to your motorcycle, and that is the suspension. It will make the biggest difference in the performance of the bike, and you will notice it the most. Now, I know you may be thinking, well, what about exhaust? What about tires? What about, I don't know, come up with ergonomics, a lot of different things. Yes, those will make a difference, but this, fork springs and shock, will make the absolute biggest difference in the ride and feel of your motorcycle. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is motorcycles off the factory floor that you buy at the shop are typically set up for a rider that weighs between 170 and 180 pounds with about 15 pounds of luggage. So that means the stock shock is not likely set up for the type of riding that you do or for your weight. So if you don't fall within that category, then your bike is not going to be performing at its best. So in this particular video, I'm going to talk about upgrading the shock. I've already done the forks. I'll put a link up here if I remember to the fork spring upgrade and the performance difference that made, but now it is time to upgrade the shock. Now, if you've been following my channel at all, you know that I've had two of the stock KTM shocks fail, leaked oil everywhere, not great, and I had to do kind of a hybrid shock just to get a little bit of extra riding in because I was waiting for this. What I have here is a premium Hyperpro shock that I had picked up. It has rebound damping, high speed compression damping, and low speed compression damping. And I also had a mechanical preload adjustment added so I wasn't wrenching a ring back and forth. I really don't like the rings. So I have that ability as well. It also had a progressive spring put on there. Now this particular shock has been tuned to my type of riding with my weight and how I typically ride, which is with luggage. Real briefly, I'll go through, if you're not familiar with shock settings. I know some people out there are intimately familiar, but if you're not, rebound is how fast that your shock returns to its full extension, so you have a lot of adjustment. I went through and saw how many clicks there were on rebound, and it was around 48, so there's a lot of fine adjustment there. I put the rebound around midpoint, and then we have low speed compression damping. And what that does is it's more of your small bump compliance. It's just when the shock is working up and down. It's the smaller movements of the shock. It's the slower movements of the shock. And something to keep in mind, I keep seeing misinformation out there. Slow speed or low speed compression damping has nothing to do with how fast you are traveling. It has everything to do with the rate that the shock is compressing. That's what it's for. So your small undulations, washboards, you can eat some of that up with the low speed compression damping. I checked the clickers on the low speed compression damping. There is approximately 30 clicks. This was set at 16 clicks from open, so it was closed down to 16. I opened it up a little. I'm gonna run it at 10 to try to get a little bit more compliance on the road, going through over speed bumps, things like that. So I want this to feel a little bit smoother. I have gotten some feedback that this is a very stiff spring. So I'm gonna open up the low speed compression damping to try to soften that up a little when I'm loaded. The high speed compression damping, where you're gonna see this, is when this shock is compressing very fast. It's off big hits. If you're jumping, you're hitting things hard. It's what this does is help slows that down to try to prevent bottoming out of the shock. I left this about the midpoint until I get out and do some off-road riding. I'm really not gonna know where I want that to be. So setting it low speed compression damping, a little bit on the soft side, rebound midpoint, and then high speed is midpoint again. So until I really get a lot of good off-road riding, I will not know where that needs to be. Now, the one thing I will need to do is after I get the shock installed and all my luggage loaded, is see what the compression is, to see what the preload is. I may need to make some adjustments on the preload. I would expect to make some adjustments on the preload. And what we're looking for is around 30% sag once you're on the bike. So there's some measurements you can do. I'm leaving for a trip tomorrow, so I'm not going to go through all of those measurements right now. If there's enough demand for how to set your preload, some really quick, easy ways to do it, I'll do a video on that, but we'll do that in the future. First camping trip in Virginia is tomorrow. It's already about 7 o'clock tonight. I haven't packed yet, and I want to get this on, so I'm going to get started with that. I just put 300 or so miles on the new shock. It is not nearly enough to give a full assessment, but I just wanted to make everyone, I wanted everybody out there that rides a KTM 390 Adventure to be aware that there are some suspension alternatives if you haven't looked for them yet, and that the upgrade from the stock suspension is significant. Today I rode curvy roads through Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park. I rode some interstate speeds and a little bit of off-road. I think my setup is okay. Nothing that I rode off-road was rough or challenging, so I don't really have a good feel for what it's going to be like, but even for washboards that I did ride across, it was smooth enough, and it stayed higher in the travel than what I was used to with the other shocks. So felt fine from that standpoint. It didn't feel overly harsh to me. Riding Skyline Drive and doing a lot of the curves and turns, it felt very good. It held its line. There was no wallowing of the rear end like sometimes I would experience when I'm fully loaded if I start hitting some bumps in the corner. None of that. It just felt very stable. And I think probably the best thing you could say about a suspension is you don't notice it. If you don't notice it, it's probably doing its job. If you are noticing it, that probably is a good indication that it's not doing its job. It's either squishing through too fast, it's too harsh, it's diving under braking. It just doesn't feel good. If you don't notice it, it's probably because it's set up right and it feels smooth. Now, I will do a long-term review on this shock. I just wanted to make you all aware that there are upgrades available, and so far so good. The amount of adjustment on this is such a huge improvement over the rear shock. I'm going to interrupt here real quick. Since filming that first segment, I have ridden another 700 or so miles on this shock and did quite a bit more off-roading that included parts of Section 3, Section 4, and part of Section 5 of the Mid-Atlantic BDR. Now I know Section 4 is primarily paved roads with a little bit of dirt roads, and then the northern parts of Section 3 have some good, really fun dirt roads, so I rode through there. My assessment is the same as it was before. I think one small adjustment I'm going to make is I'm going to open up the rebound to speed it up a little so the bike becomes a little bit more playful, and I'm able to get it to spring back a little, so when I preload it to get over stuff, I'll get a little bit more spring back. So I'm probably going to make that adjustment to it, but everything else that I said about how it feels, it stays the same. It feels good off-road on all those different conditions with rocky, gravel, nothing too technical yet. That will come. And then definitely riding on road, it is very, very comfortable. I compare it to when I first got the bike, and it was super hard. I had to back off the hard and soft to soften it up. This is much more compliant on the beginning of the travel, getting into the deeper part. So much more comfortable, much more control, and just a better shock overall. So back to what I was saying. So if you have any questions about this rear shock, leave that in the comments below. I'll do the best I can to answer those questions. They're not cheap. It cost me over $1,300 for this shock, but I think for the type of riding that I do, and because I've already blown out two, KTM's not going to replace any of those under warranty. A replacement of one of those is about $600. I know I could get it rebuilt at other places, but it's still a very basic shock, and I'm likely going to be pushing it to its limit. So aftermarket it is. Overall, the suspension of the bike feels really good. Thanks for watching. Again, if you have any questions, leave those in the comments below. If you have experience on this shock, leave those in the comments below as well. Or if you have a different shock that you've tried on your bike that you want to share with all the other KTM 390 Adventure owners, leave that in the comments below. Get out, do some riding, ride safe, and I will see you out there.